If you want a quick loom knitting project that you can do with your leftover yarn, you can make this double moss stitch ear warmer or headband. All you need to do is knit and purl over a 4-row repeat. And I'll walk you through each step, and that includes the chain cast on and the stretchy bind off. I'm Catherine, and I'd like to thank you for watching my channel, Ms. Yarn. You may want to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my tutorials, where I'll walk you through projects from beginning to end and with captions to help you out. In today's video, we're going to cover number 1, how to cast on, number 2, how to do the double moss stitch, which I've also seen called the double seed stitch and the box stitch, and finally, number 3, how to bind off. For the supplies, you're going to need a round loom. I'm going to be demonstrating on a 41 peg loom, but you can also use a 36 peg loom or a 40 peg loom. You'll also need 1 ball of yarn, a hook, a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and some stitch markers. I used 20 purple elastics to mark 20 of my pegs. I wanted to mark half of them to help you remember when I knit and when I purl, but I'll help you set up your looms in just a sec. Let's look at 2 different sized looms and the different circumferences for the ear warmers. When I used the 41 peg loom, my ear warmer was 20 inches or 51 centimeters long when it's not stretched out. And this fits my head, which is larger than most other women's heads. On the 36 peg loom, on the other hand, the circumference is 17 inches or 43 centimeters long. And this fits a normal-sized woman's head, and I'm sure it's also great for teenagers. And let's also talk about stitch markers. So the first 2 rounds of this sequence are knit 2, purl 2, which means knit, knit, purl, purl. And I like to mark when I purl. And I always use pink or purple to mark purl stitches since they start with the letter P. So that means that I'm going to mark on my loom pegs 3 and 4, and then 7 and 8, and then 11 and 12, etc. Now, if you have a 41 peg loom like I do, don't worry at all about not having a perfect multiple of 4. You'll mark pegs 39 and 40 for your purl stitches, and you won't mark peg 41 at all, since we're going to be knitting that one for the first 2 rounds. We're going to be using the chain cast on. So let's begin by making a slip knot, and we're going to put that slip knot on peg 1. We'll put the tail in the middle of the loom, and we'll keep the working yarn just in front of us. And to begin, we're going to take our hook and we're going to dive into that loop on peg 1. We're going to grab the working yarn to make a loop. So we're just pulling upwards to make a larger loop that we're going to put behind peg 2. Then with the working yarn, you're going to feed it between pegs 2 and 3 into that larger loop. So your fingers are going to be pulling on it. And then you're going to be tightening up the yarn to make another large loop, which is behind peg 3 now. So feed the yarn between pegs 3 and 4 into that loop. Tighten the yarn with your right fingers to make a new large loop, which is now going behind peg 4. Then feed the yarn between pegs 4 and 5. Pull on that yarn again to make another large loop. I'm just going to take a quick break by holding that loop in my left hand for a second. I want to pull on the tail on peg 1 very quickly so that the loop on peg 1 doesn't get too loose. So now back to my chain cast on. I'm going to feed the yarn between pegs 5 and 6. With my right fingers, I'm pulling on it to make a new loop, and that's going to go behind peg 6. So now you probably have the hang of it. So let's meet again when we're closer to the anchor peg. So here I've gone ahead around the loom on my own, and I have the loop behind peg 40, and I'm going to feed my yarn between pegs 40 and 41 to make a new loop. This loop goes behind peg 41. Then I'll feed the yarn between pegs 41 and peg 1 to make a new loop, and this is the last loop. So this last loop is going to go on peg 1, and I'm going to tighten the working yarn. So we've got 2 loops on peg 1, and now the cast on is done. Now we're ready to start the double moss stitch, and I've also seen this called the double seed stitch as well as the box stitch. So don't get confused if you see this particular sequence under another name. It's a 4-row repeat, and the first round is going to be knit 2, purl 2. So we're going to be using E-wraps. So let's wrap pegs 1 and 2. And then to knit over on peg 1, we're going to take both of those 2 bottom loops and bring them over the top of the peg. We're going to tighten up the tail a little bit. And then we're going to knit over on peg 2 normally. And then we're going to purl on pegs 3 and 4. So on peg 3, we're going to take our hook. We're going to dive into that loop to grab the working yarn below. And we're going to make a new loop by pulling it upwards. And next we're going to take the old loop off of the peg. I'm using my hook to make it easier on this one. And then let's put the new loop on the peg. Then we tighten things up, and that purl stitch is done. So on peg 4, let's do that again. Dive in with your hook, scoop up that working yarn to make up a new loop. Take the old loop off, put the new loop on, and then tighten your working yarn. Okay, great. So that is the 4-stitch repeat. So knit, knit, purl, purl. Now on peg 5, you're going to, on pegs 5 and 6, you're going to wrap them, and then you're going to knit over. And then on peg 7 and 8, you're going to purl, and the reminder is with those purple elastics or whatever stitch markers you have chosen to use. So on your own, you can continue this knit 2, purl 2 sequence, and let's meet when we're at peg 37. Here I've jumped ahead to peg 37, and I have my last set of stitches to do, and I have 5 pegs left rather than 4. So I'm going to E-wrap pegs 37 and 38 as usual. Then let's purl on pegs 39 and 40 as usual. And then we'll E-wrap on peg 41. And that's because on peg 41, you always need to do the opposite stitch of what you did on peg 40. So on peg 40, we purl, and on peg 41, we knit. And now round 1 is done. So for round 2, it's the same sequence as round 1. You're just going to knit, knit, purl, purl all the way around the loom. So I'll let you do that round all on your own, and let's meet when it's time for round 3. So now we've completed round 2, and we're starting round 3, and we're going to purl 2, knit 2. So here I'm purling on pegs 1 and 2. And then I do the E-wrap knit stitch on pegs 3 and 4. We're going to purl 2. And then we knit 2. So you can continue with this purl 2, knit 2 sequence, and let's meet when we're at peg 37. So here I'm at peg 37 of round 3, and I am going to purl on pegs 37 and 38. And then I'm going to knit on pegs 39 and 40. And then I'm going to purl on peg 41. And that's because peg 41 is always different from peg 40. Okay, great. So round 3 is done. And now we're ready to start round 4, which is purl 2, knit 2. So let's purl on pegs 1 and 2. And then we knit on pegs 3 and 4. So that's the 4-row repeat of the double moss stitch. So when it's time for round 5, you'll do exactly what you did for round 1. So at this point, you can do 20 rounds in total, and we'll meet again when it's time for the stretchy bind off. I've done my 20 rounds in total, so I'm ready to take this ear warmer off the loom. But before I do that, I want to show you my leftover yarn. I feel like I barely used any of this Wool Ease number 6 yarn, so I should have a lot of leftover yarn for more projects. So with that, let's prepare to bind off by wrapping our yarn around the loom 2 1/4 times. I don't like my yarn to be too long for the stretchy bind off because then it takes even longer to pull up your yarn up and down the pegs. So now that we've cut our yarn at 2 1/4 times the loom, you'll thread your needle, and I need you to remember these 3 words: down, up, behind. So with our needle and yarn, we go down peg 1, up peg 41, and behind peg 1. Then we go down peg 2, up peg 1, and behind peg 2. So we go down the peg on the left, we go up the peg on the right, then we go behind the peg on the left. And that's the down, up, behind sequence of the stretchy bind off. So now you probably have got the hang of it now. So let's meet again when we're closer to the anchor peg. So I've worked my way around the loom and I've gone behind peg 40. So now I go down peg 41. I go up peg 40. Then behind peg 41. Finally, let's go down peg 1. And that's the last move, going up and down these pegs with our yarn needle. Next, we want to take our project off the loom. So let's leave the loop on peg 1 in place, so ignore that one for now. Let's start with peg 2 by taking the loop off of the loom with our hook. And let's take our work off peg by peg until it's completely off. Here I've gone ahead and I'm taking the last loops off of the loom. So now let's get the loom out of the way and let's stretch the fabric and see what the double moss stitch looks like. As you can see, the stitches at peg 41 look just fine, even though we don't end with a perfect multiple of 4. So now it's time to weave in the ends, so let's thread our yarn needle. The loops along the stretchy bind off are too loose to weave into, so let's weave in and out the stitches that are just under that bind off. I'm going to weave in one direction and then make my way back. I want to make a little knot with this tail, so I untwist the yarn to separate the plies. Then with my yarn needle, I'm going to insert one ply into the fabric, and then I'm going to tie a knot. Then I'm going to tighten it up. I'll tighten all 4 strands and then I'll snip off the ends. Now let's weave in the tail from our chain cast on. So let's thread the needle and we'll bring the yarn towards the wrong side of the project. So since the cast on is pretty tight, I'm just going to weave in through the cast on edge. Now I'm weaving in the opposite direction. I'm untwisting the yarn again to separate the 2 plies. And then I'll insert one ply into the project so I can tie a knot. Let's tighten all 4 strands and cut off the ends. So now our ear warmer and headband is done. So I hope you liked this quick project. If you enjoyed this tutorial and it's been helpful, please press like and leave a comment. That will really help me out. Thanks.